So, I'm a working futurist. I'm a professional futurist trained in strategic foresight from the University of Houston by the guy who is the guy in foresight. So my teacher, Peter Bishop, is to foresight what Peter Drucker was to management, or whatever medicals Peter was to you guys, okay? So foresight is a profession, and I want to, like Ken said, I want to give you a white belt in foresight. I want to give you some of the sort of the master recipes that we use to think about the future. And the reason this is important is because I could come up here and just talk about trends, and I will be doing some of that. But the more important thing, I'm only going to be with you for 1 hour, and this blue sky business is going to shape your future. So rather than me just talk about trends, I want you to understand how I think, how futurists think, so that you can apply that framework kind of moving forward. So with that, I'm going to start by being a complete heretic and say that strategic planning is absolutely insufficient. And here's why. Planning tends to hold the past in a sort of precious position. Like, what have we always done? And then, how are we going to do it a little better, faster, or cheaper? Right? How are we going to reach more patients? How are we going to have better outcomes? How are we going to do better prevention? And I, by the way, am not a doctor. I just was given a stack of crap to read about family medicine. I read it all. I'm not here to, direct your traffic around that piece. I'm here to give a futurist perspective on your future. So strategic planning tends to kind of be a little bit rear view mirror focused. And it's a little hard to drive if you're just looking at what you've always done, right? Strategic foresight takes a completely different approach. What foresight does is we use a series of tools and techniques, and we start at least a generation into the future. 20 years is about the time frame of a generation. And the reason we start at least a generation into the future is because the truth is no one knows exactly what the future is going to be a generation from now. But the second reason, and sort of the heart reason for this, is that when you have to think a generation into the future, it gets you out of your own way. You have to start thinking about your kids, and if you're at a certain age, your kids' kids, right? So it doesn't have to be about protecting your turf, peeing on your trees. It can be, what are the trees that we want for our kids and for theirs? So foresight looks at least 20 years into the future and says, the second question here, what's plausible? What are the plausible futures of family medicine based on the trends that we know, right? And I'm going to get back to the idea of plausibility in just a moment. And then once you identify these plausible futures, you say, all right, if these are the possible futures, what do we have to do to be future ready? Now, and the equivalent is you're just looking through the windshield, right, as you're driving towards the future. So strategic planning is usually a little bit more about looking in your rearview mirror. Strategic foresight is all about what is coming and are we future ready? So sometimes people say, well, Rebecca, futurists, that seems a little woo-woo. But the truth is, you work around, you listen, you are tuned into futurists all the time. If you have Weather Underground or weather.com on your smartphone, you're looking at what the weather is going to be this afternoon, what the weather is going to be tonight, this weekend, if you're trying to make weekend plans. And the truth is that meteorologists need to know 3 factors about the weather, and they need to know 3 very extensive equations, and with those 6 factors, they can predict with a certain level of accuracy what the future weather will be, and the same thing is true in futuring. So Catherine Booth, who is considered the mother of the Salvation Army, this beautiful quote, "If we're to better the future, we must disturb the present." I wrote a little ranty post on Facebook yesterday. Quick sidebar, I was having drinks with the executive director and the president of a board that I'm on, and I just left the chairmanship of this particular board, and I've got a pretty clear idea about what needs to happen for this organization in the future. But now I'm the past president, so I'm absolutely powerless. And they told me that they had taken my ideas to other members of the board, and another member of the board said, well, Rebecca, she's way out there. How do we bring the middle along? And I felt really bad when they told me this story, because I thought, oh my goodness, here the executive director and the chairman of the board, they probably feel like I'm a liability, And then I slept on it and I came out fighting. And I thought, I am a liability to the present. I absolutely am. And I need to stand in that because I just, at every meeting that I attend, I imagine a row of chairs that empty, but that would be filled by our kids or their kids. And I think, what choices do we make today that benefit them? So if that makes you uncomfortable, or if that makes you think like, ooh, Rebecca, she's way out there. I'm not way out there, I'm right in here. And I'm thinking about those kids, right? So you have to be willing to disturb the present if you want to benefit the future. So 3 myths about foresight. The first myth is this one: you cannot predict the future. Oftentimes people ask me if I travel with one of these magic 8 balls, right? Like, do you have one of those in your bag? And one of the myths is that you cannot predict the future. And it's a myth because the futures are knowable. There are things that are happening today. Smartphones, are they getting smaller or big? Is the technology getting smaller or bigger? Smaller, right? We're embedding chips into animals, humans, others. Are digital devices becoming more connected or less connected? More connected. There are things that we know are happening. So it's not that the future is unpredictable. It's maybe that we don't have a professional way of thinking about it, right? And that's what we do as foresight professionals. The second myth, remember Karnak, right? Generational moment here, Kushner. Right? The second myth is that as a futurist, I predict the future. And that's not true. If anybody bills themselves as a futurist and tries to tell you what the future will be in 2040 and 2030, they are full of crap. Because the best we can do as futurists is work out what the plausible futures will be. And even those, if we develop, if I would sit with you guys and we would develop 4 plausible futures for the future of family medicine, none of those would be spot on. None of them would be spot on, but many of them would have elements of what that future will be. So there is not a single future. There are multiple plausible futures, and that leads me to the third myth, which is that the future is out of my control. The future happens to me. And that's true on some level, right? You didn't cause the Great Recession, but it impacted you and your family. It impacted the people that you serve. So there are super forces that will impact you, trends that are absolutely beyond your control. But my gosh, you work in medicine, right? There are also things that people do to act on their own future. So the future doesn't just happen to us, we also impact the future. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna get groovy with this white belt situation. These little kids, right? So a little bit of beginner's mind. We're gonna kind of wrap our heads around the future and get our white belt in foresight. I said a moment ago that strategic planning is insufficient. And it is especially insufficient during a time of what in futuring we call era change, right? So era change happens when there is some sort of a systemic reset that everything becomes different. And in my last book, Regeneration, I posited that we are in a reset period. Every 4 generations, America goes through a wintertime period. We sort of cycle in these seasonal cycles. We go through a wintertime period. And during wintertime, everything gets reset. So when you think about a kid going into college today, right, they are asking, will I work long enough to pay off my college debt? Is college worth it, right? The only place where college admissions applications are going up are states that have legalized marijuana. For obvious reasons. But I believe that we're in an era change right now. And what I want to share with you are kind of the master bread recipe for how to think about era change. In Foresight, one of the models that we use is called the 4 forces model. And this model, it's going to make perfect sense to you. It basically says that there are, in priority order, 4 forces which can cause an era change, and you're going to start to recognize these. Resources, air, water, access to energy, fuel or energy, right? These are all raw resources that people need to live, right? When those become threatened, it doesn't matter how great your medical system is, it doesn't matter how wonderful Other things in society are when there is a threat to that resource, all bets are off. California right now saying that they have 1 year of potable water left before they go dry. California is in a massive era shift right now because when resources are threatened, nothing else matters. Everything starts to scramble around resources. Second thing is technology. Second major trend, major force is technology. And, I think we get a little fixated, like we think this kind of crap is technology, and it is, and it's on our person and increasingly embedded. I've got the watch, right, which I know I've gotten 2 text messages because it's given me a gentle hug around my wrist while I've been up here. But, we think of this stuff as technology, and although it is, when you back out and you look at just the definition of what technology is, technology are things that just make life more convenient, right? And when you apply technology, for example, to a resource challenge, you can get all kinds of magic. So just to use this California water example real quickly, if California could figure out the technology of desalination and how to do that at scale and efficiently, the resource challenge absolves itself, right? So when we think about the future of family medicine, what resource challenges might we have? What technology challenges might we have or trends are we going to face? And then the third one is demographics. So this is the third force. And demographics is it's the who. It's the who of society. I used to do a lot of work in public accounting. And right now, one of the things that's happening in public accounting is that there aren't enough young people being groomed for partnership. So there is a merger mania happening among public accounting firms because senior partners are looking down their bench of talent. There is no one there to sell the firm to, so they're just selling the firm to somebody who will buy it. Right? That's their exit plan. That's their succession strategy. So the demographics are the who of an organization or of a society. And in the United States, as an example, when Social Security was invented, it was based on the 1898 retirement age of 65, which was set by the German general Otto von Bismarck. He set the retirement age at 65 because most people died by 63. So it was really a retention strategy for the Army. So we've adopted this, we're grandfathering it up, scooching it up, point by point. But when Social Security was invented, we had over 14 workers supporting each retiree, and now we're down to like 2 1/3 workers supporting each retiree. So the demographics, right, those have to add up in a society. And when they don't add up in a society, all kinds of hell can break loose, right? China's demographics, the 1 child per family policy. 2 years ago, China said, we're lifting that. Have as many babies as you want, right? Because they recognize that by 2050, China will be the oldest country in the world next to Russia, right? So demographics, the who of society, absolutely matters. And then finally, governance. Governance is the fourth force, and I just want to point this out because governance is important, right? But if any of the other forces shift drastically, it doesn't matter how great your governance is, right? It doesn't matter how transparent your board of directors is. It doesn't matter how efficiently you run the organization. If these other pieces haven't become a part of your foresight and your plan, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So with that, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking about some of these trends. I want to start with the resource trend, right? So this is the NASA heat map from 1885 to 2010. This is just the visualization of how things were changing. So we're in World War II right now. Now we're back from World War II. We're headed to Korea. We've gone to Korea, right? 60s, make love, not war, right? There Carter administration, first Reagan administration. Then now here's President Clinton. Wow. So what we know is that we believe that this will persist. The question for futurists is, do we go through a more drastic change in our resources and in our environment? If we know that California has 1 year of water left, and we know that California produces a lot of our crops, a lot of the food we eat comes from California. But here in Wisconsin, we're going to be winners. Farmers market is already a little bit longer than it was 11 years ago when I moved to Madison. All the states that border the Canadian border and this whole northern rim, they're called the NORC countries, they will be winners from climate change. Wisconsin is going to be the new Sunbelt for northern Canada, right? So when you start thinking about water depletion, when you start thinking about the planet getting hotter, when you start thinking about what that means for human health and mortality and growing seasons and so forth, this is something that's very real. We're a little insulated from this up here. Let's talk a little bit about technology. This was the epic showdown between Watson and the meat suits on Jeopardy. And you know better than I that Watson can read every journal of the American Medical Association in the time that it takes you and I to pour and drink our cup of coffee in the morning, right? In the places where Watson is being utilized for medicine with a certain level of accuracy, Watson can give the top 4 possible diagnoses based on patient data, leaving it up to the doctor or the nurse practitioner or whomever to make the final call on what they believe it really is. The reason I bring this up is because it is increasingly becoming clear that those things that are rule-based, linear, right, can be roboticized. So what is going to be left for humans will be things that require things that only humans can do. Compassion, right? What in the medical profession maybe you've referred to as, bedside manner. Additional innovation to come out of past history. So the idea is, a generation from now, do you think that computers, big data, will be doing more for patients or less for patients? And if you think it's more, what are we doing today to get ready for that? Right. I also want to bring you, this famous sheep, Dolly, right? Dolly the cloned sheep. There is a rash of technology that is already available, but technology often runs ahead of the two-legged's comfort with the technology. So although we can clone sheep, and there have been successful experiments of getting DNA from deceased animals and reconstituting them into new similar pets for their owners, this stuff is ready and it's available, but technology always runs ahead of people's readiness for it. So sometimes people say to me, Rebecca, when are humans ever going to catch up with technology? I get this all the time. Technology is changing so fast. What should our approach be? And I think what they're asking me is, should the approach be, which technology should we invest in? And it's not about me telling you which technologies to invest in. It's about me kind of wrapping my arm around your shoulder and saying, dude, it's not going to get better. You were never going to feel like you're ahead of the technology. Just put that kvetch aside. It's always going to be the case. And so when you start to think about the technologies that are going to impact your next generation of practitioners, your next generation of patients, right? What is that going to look like? We already know that one of the side effects of our more smart screen, life is that, we've got sort of this CPA, continuous partial attention. Right? CPA, continuous partial attention. And what that means is that, we can't stop engaging. And there's a neurological reason. Our brains light up. We think it's urgent when it's lit, when the screen is lit. It's why you have lights on an ambulance, right? Move the hell out of the way. Those lights get people's attention. But those lights get people's attention. So we know that you are reaching for your smartphone 150 times a day. And we know that if my video doesn't load in 3 seconds on my website, you will leave. If it takes you more than 2 page clicks to get to where you think you're trying to go on a website, you will abort. Now, just to put that in perspective, that means that we spend between 3 and 5 seconds on a website. Goldfish, can concentrate for 6 seconds. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about some demographic trends. I love talking about demographic trends because these things, to me, technology feels glossy. People get excited. Watson is amazing, right? It's very glossy. Demographic trends are like the drip, drip, drip trends in our community. When we, a few years ago, elected the largest group of women to the federal government than we ever had, that didn't happen overnight. That happened because in the 1980s, when the bulk of the economy shifted from a manufacturing economy to a knowledge-based economy, women became equally advantaged to men. So the fact that we now, 60% of all people who hold management supervisor positions are women. You know about the med school statistics. You probably know about the JD, the law school statistics. This notion of women taking their place in society really started because of the way the economy shifted and the family shifted in the 1980s. Access to birth control, so forth. So a few trends to think about the changing family. I checked into the Westin in Columbus, Ohio, and I saw this sign in the lobby. If you can't read it, it says Men's Divorce School. And I was like, holy shit, I got to check this out, you know? Because one of the things that I love as a futurist is I'm always looking for weak signals. Like, what are the little bings, you know, that show up in popular culture that could grow and so forth. So that night, when Men's Divorce School started up, I sort of, you know, stalked the room, and it was Columbus. It was in Ohio, and I admit that that room was full of men wearing seed corn caps. And there's a law firm out of New York that this is their specialty. They help men not screw up during divorce. In fact, the book they were selling in the back of the room was like 67 things men do to screw up their divorces. So this law firm has developed this niche, and they are right on trend, because when you look into this, of all baby boomer divorces, 2/3 are executed by women. And furthermore, so that's at like one end of the demographic bubble. What's happening at the other end of the demographic bubble is this. By 2017, this is a national statistic, half of all kindergartens will be children of single parents, right? So when you think about community well-being, right? When you think about knitting the social fabric together around who your patients, your clients, your neighbors are, we're going to need some thicker fabric. Adulthood, this is one of my favorite statistics. So when I started my business, I was only studying demographics, and we started to see adulthood being pushed back for younger generations. They were waiting longer to get married, buy a house, have a family, and so forth. And the numbers today, I went to Wikipedia, the source of all knowledge. In the United States, these are average ages of first marriages for men and women. In the United States, average age of a first marriage for a young man is 29, 27 for women. Ladies, I just want to point one thing out here. See Peru? Cougar Nation, baby. Young men marrying older women. So, and this doesn't mean that they're not starting families earlier, right? This means that they're just waiting to get married. And in the largest urban centers, we have more people living alone than living together, right? New York City, living alone, living solo. So when you start to think again about family well-being, community well-being, health and welfare, we still have these primal needs for togetherness, but we're reshuffling how that all happens. And then when I think about your profession, right? Who is your next generation of practitioner? These are young physicians' feelings about healthcare's future. This was in 2012. 21% are neutral, but 57% are either somewhat pessimistic or highly pessimistic. In fact, the largest percentage said they were highly pessimistic about the future of healthcare. So I'm going to ask you, if you have, when you think about the future of this profession, if your current next generation is pessimistic about the future of the profession, what do you think that does to the attractiveness for the people who come behind them, right? And I know it's one of the reasons that this initiative has now got its fourth point, which is not only do we have to do great patient outcomes and those top three, but now we have to also have great satisfaction among the people who are delivering care and service. Then when you think about governance, of course, this is the biggie in your space, the Affordable Care Act. I want to see where that kid ends up. Like, what is his story going to be like 50 years from now? He was like, yeah, I was next to Barack. We had matching ties when he signed the Affordable Care Act. It's fantastic. So ACA, right? That certainly is creating era change in healthcare. Remember, we said there are four forces. The fourth one is governance. That has created era change for you. But how is technology? How are demographics and maybe even resources creating era shift for you? And as a futurist, I will say this is not over. This is not over. One of the key questions in terms of governance and your space, and the key reason is because of the middle class. In the research that I did for my book, my last book is kind of in three parts. In the first part, I talk about Changing Seasons in America. In the middle of the book, I talk about the 6 key questions I think America needs to ask itself to come through winter working better for more people. And the last third of the book is about, all right, what do we need to do to get from winter to spring? In the middle of the book, one of the 6 key questions I asked is, does the middle class matter? And I'm an economist, like I geek out on some of this stuff, but I was shocked to find out that in America, we do not have a definition of the middle class. Like when news sources go out and do polling on the middle class, the first question they ask you is, are you a member of the middle class? And you self-identify, yes, and most of us say yes, right? But the truth is that the middle class has been declining since the 1970s, and the middle class in America is defined based on a family's ability to put their kids through college, afford retirement, afford to take care of themselves, take a vacation once a year, and a couple other things that are falling out of my head right now. The reason the middle class is shrinking isn't just because on the left here, wages have grown 20 or 21% from 1990 to 2008. Wages have stagnated, but the costs of being middle class have skyrocketed. So for housing, 56% increase. The big bar is healthcare, right? The second bar is on the far right. This is public college price change, and this is private college price change. So it's not that, it's not that people don't still have those dreams. It's just that being able to afford them has gone up. So when you think about ongoing governance in your space, there will be continued pressure to make that bar lower. Absolutely, right? To get more help, to try to help get more people into the middle class.